Right, welcome back to another episode on Phil's Works YouTube channel. I am Phil, and in this episode, I'm going to go through and do the first step to reassembling a shovel head. Now, a lot of people always whinge that I leave out the hard to do bits, or I've already done the hard shit that they want to see. Whatever, I'm going to show you how to do everything in this series. Obviously, I'm not going to do it all in one video because you people do not have the attention span to watch the whole thing. So in this video, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to measure up all the bearings and everything we need to start assembling this bottom end. Now I'm going to go through and show you how to balance this bottom end and all that shit in the next video. But in this video, I just want to go through and show you basically what we need to measure, what we need to do to work out what this set of cases needs to be put back together. So I'm going to go through, work out my pinion bearings. I'm going to show you an upgraded pinion bearing that I use. I'm going to go through, talk about the Timken assembly. This being a late shovel, they all have Timken assemblies. So if you have an early pre-54 motor that does not have a Timken assembly, you got two flat rollers. I will be doing another video on that coming up, but in this Shovelhead series, I'm just going to be going through the generic later model Timken assembly, which makes life so fucking easy. So anyway, enough talking shit. Let's get into this. I want to do some measuring and show you what we need to order. Alrighty, basically where we want to start on this thing, we want to go through and measure up our pinion bearings and our pinion shaft. Now, unfortunately not one bearing fits all with this stuff because this stuff is pretty close tolerance. You want your bearings between like 0.4 of a thou. So just to put that into context, like we're talking about half of a thou. So less than half a thou, we want to get these bearings within tolerance. So this stuff has to be measured pretty accurately. Like I have some really good measuring equipment here. I'm measuring to the 10th of a thou, so that's 0.1 of a thou. So that's sort of how accurate you got to measure this stuff. So if you're not competent with using micrometers and like a telescopic gauge and stuff, you probably shouldn't be doing this. But anyway, I'll show you how to do it nonetheless. So basically, I have my cases here that I have completely blasted and just set aside. Something to get in a good habit of when you blast something, or maybe you've cleaned it and you don't want it to rust. You can probably see in here, I have coated my bearing surface with grease. Now, that is a must, because if that rusts, you're pretty well screwed. You've got to put another race in this thing. So let's just break these apart. You can see I have grease all through my bearing surfaces where my bearings sit, and just to make sure I don't get any corrosion in there. So I'm going to get all of that grease out now because we're going to have to measure that surface. Now you probably see on my little pen and pad here, I have already measured it because I am proactive and want to get this thing done. So I'm just going to show you basically how I did it and how I got to, where I'm at. So easy, Tiger. The other thing I wanted to say is you can see I've just got a bit of butcher's paper down on my bench here. Super good way to do it. You see a lot of drag races at the track that do this sort of stuff. You want these motors to be fucking clean when you put them together. You don't want any dirt in the bearings or nothing like that. So a good way to do it is, a nice bit of butcher's paper like this. Super clean. You can just screw it up, throw it in the bin when you're done. The other good thing about it is it shows up little bearings and stuff really well. If I was to do this like I usually do on my bench here, sometimes the little bearings are harder to see, but on a nice bit of butcher's paper like this, it's super easy to see. So anyway, like I said, what we want to go through and do is measure our pinion race here. So to get the bearing size, we need to measure the OD of our pinion shaft, and then we need to measure the ID of our race here. When I'm saying ID and OD, I mean internal diameter and outside diameter. So just abbreviating because I'm lazy. So need to measure the OD of that and the ID of this, and then we take them away from each other, and that's going to give us our bearing size. Like I said, I've already got it here, but I'm going to show you anyway. So the idea of measuring our race and this here telescopic gauge is because our verniers only measure an outside diameter. Sure, you can get some that measure an internal, but these ones only measure an external diameter. So all we have to do is get our little telescopic gauge here and then put that through the ID, and then we can work it out. Basically the way these things work, two little guys are spring loaded, So you close it up and then you can lock the bottom is the lock, and then when you put it in your race, you just undo it like that, and then you do it back up and get your little measurement. I'll show you what I mean. So you put it in there like this, you want to go past vertical, so it's on an angle inside the race, and then we do it up, and then we just slowly pull this thing past vertical. And that gives us the largest diameter possible, and that's what we want to measure. So we do that and come through and put it through our mic here. If you guys have mics but aren't 100% sure how to read them, heaps of good YouTube videos on how to read mics correctly. These ones are a bit more difficult because they have tenths of a thou, but you need to have tenths of a thou mics. The most common mic is only accurate to a thou. You need to get tenth of a thou mics. So this is our internal race diameter. So here I got, race size is 1.7535. So I'll put that on the screen here so you can see it. We are measuring to the fourth digit, so 0001. That's what we need to measure to. So we got 1.75, so that's inch and a quarter, 35. So 3.5 thou over inch and a quarter this guy is. So we've written that down here. Sweet. So now we need to get on to measuring our pinion shaft. So what we do, same thing. Obviously we don't need to use our internal telescopic gauge now because we are measuring an OD, an outside diameter. So do this just like that. Measure him up. Sweet. So I'm pretty well bang on inch and a quarter. So I might be a tenth under inch and a quarter. So these sizes are usually pretty nominal like that. You'll have inch and 3/4 is the standard, inch and a quarter is the standard, and then your bearing roller size is 3/16, 0.1875 is your standard size, and then you sort of go over from there. So regular pinion bearing sizes, right? So when you get an overbearing or when you do the earlier stuff, they all come in like 1/10 over, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10 over. It usually goes all the way up to a thou over, and that's the biggest you can go. So with the standard pinion bearing on this shovel, right, it is a two-piece caged roller like this. So what I mean by that is this bearing has a heap of loose rollers like this, and then it has two races that hold them, and then has washers each side like this. So that's all well and good, but on a late model Evo style, they upgraded this. So what they upgraded it to is this cage style, but obviously I've already measured this, got the right one, is this completely encapsulated cage style bearing. Look how long the rollers are compared to these ones. So you see you've got two little rollers like this that sit side by side, and on this one we've got a massive long roller that sits the whole way. So the longer the roller, the more pressure this thing can hold, the more force that it can hold. So these larger style bearings are so much easier to install for one, and they hold so much more weight for two. So I always like to go with these upgraded Evo style bearings, but they even say that it's an upgraded bearing here. So this is Rollies. This is a website that we use in Australia. This is a pinion bearing, big twin 87 to 99. So later style Evo stuff. And it retrofits from 58 to 86. So all the way from 1958 through to 86, this retro style bearing will fit. So that's that. So this is my retro style bearing. I'm gonna put that to the side. So I have my pinion size that I've written down here, and I have my race size that I've written down here. So if we were to go, say you're going with your normal style bearings here, we've got to shoot for, let me do a quick maths here. If you're going with your normal size bearings here, you'd have to shoot for like a 6/10 over bearing basically. So what you want to do basically, you want to take your race size away from your pinion size, and then you want to divide that by 2, and then you got to remember that you're going to need 4/10 clearance. So take your 4/10 away, and that will tell you how many tenths over your bearing needs to be. But with this style bearing, with our lathe style bearing, they've made it really, really easy to identify which bearing you need. They give you a little chart and it has colors now. So you have different colored bearings instead of the annoying 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10. So instead of having the annoying tenths over style, they just have a color. So for instance, this color is red. So what you do is you take your pinion size, and then in the chart, I'm going to put it in the, I'll put it up here in the corner. In the chart, it'll show you your pinion size, and that'll be one section. And then you have a look for your pinion size, and then you cross-reference down to your race size, and then that will tell you, those two numbers will tell you what color bearing you need. So that'll get you within 2/10 of a thou. So that is what I've done here. So that is how we measure our pinion bearing. And once we've measured our pinion bearing, before we put any of our flywheels or anything like that together, before we bolt this into anything, we want to feel fit our pinion shaft in our case. Sure, measuring stuff's all well and good, but there's nothing better than a feel fit. You can measure your life away and then put it in and it's going to be too tight or too loose. So you want to feel fit these things every time. Don't be lazy, order the bearings and then assemble that and slap the cases together and hope for the best. You want to put these bearings on and try it in the case and feel fit before you start assembling any of your flywheels. So let's do that now. I haven't actually feel fit this yet. So let's have a look. All we want to do is get our bearing, put it in there like that, and then put our pinion shaft in like that. So what we're looking for, right? So we want to put our pinion shaft in, that's obviously where it lives. You want to have a little bit of end play. You want to be able to move the end of your shaft a little bit. That's perfect. Just move the end. You don't want it too tight where it's solid. That's where it's going to pick up. You want to be able to just move the end of your shaft, and you want to be able to spin it nicely. See that? See that spins super nicely there? That's exactly what you want. So a little bit of end play, easy to spin. So that is the correct bearing for our race here. That is all freaking well and good. So that is us measuring our pinion bearing up. That's super easy. And now to get to our Timken side. Now you've probably heard me say Timken bearing a heap of times. You're probably like, what the fuck is he talking about? Or maybe you have dealt with these Timken style bearings before. Basically the way a Timken style bearing works, it is just two tapered bearings that are opposite each other. So when you lock them together, there's two tapers like this, two tapered bearings that are locked together, and that gives you a nice smooth spin. And it also stops any axial play. What I mean by axial play is because they're two tapers like this, the crank can't move side to side inside the cases. That is the main reason they went to a Timken style bearing. In an earlier pre-54 flat roller engine, you have to put hardened shims between the flywheels that bounce off the races in the cases, and that's what stops your actual movement. This is much better because it's a contained roller axial thrust bearing, and not the, obviously, just a shim style that bounces off a flat surface. So basically all you got to do with these things, when you push them in the case, they have two spaces, right? So you have your inner bearing. All this has to stay together, by the way. You have to use a set. When I say a set, you have to use a set that has been ground together. So this set has the correct axial movement on it, has the correct preload and everything. And there's two spaces you have to make sure you use. So you've got your bearing, like I said, taper bearing. You have the race that'll go in the case here. I'll press them in a second. And then you have an outer and an inner washer. So this outer washer, that sits between your two races, and that sets the distance between the two races. And then your inner washer sets the distance between your two bearings when you lock them together. So very important that you run both of these things. If you don't, you will blow up your engine pretty quickly. So inner race between the two bearings like that, and then your outer race, your outer spacer goes between your two bearings just like that. Like I said, make sure you run the correct spaces for your set of bearings, or if you're smart enough to just rebuild these sets with bearings that are a lot cheaper, you can set them up and do the preload yourself. But much easier is to buy this. I think this was like $100, $110 or something. Not worth your time fucking around trying to save a few bucks. Alright, so that's our pinion side all sorted out. We've got the correct bearing for that. Now let's go through and press our races into our left case. Alright, so what I got going on here, I just got a bit of aluminium stock underneath my case here, just so I'm not banging, my steel race on the steel table, and when I turn it over, I'm not banging the race, against the case. I want to have something nice and solid up against this surface so all the shock doesn't go through the case. So basically what we want to start with, we want to start by putting our little spacer in. Now, if we have a look inside our case here, see it's got a little tiny groove there, and that's where this guy sits. Now, you see it's got a brake here. Now, we have to line that brake up with this hole here. See how it's got a through hole there? So the idea of this is when the flywheels are spinning, oil gets caught in this gallery here, and then it feeds down into the middle of our bearing. So we're just going to make sure this little brake here lines up with this hole. So, easy way to get this thing in is to just, hit it in on the side like this. See, I've sort of just hit it in on the side there. And then we just get it nice and low and start turning it. And then I just get myself a little punch and slowly work our way in there. Oh, I went a bit far. There it is. So, just for educational purpose, you see that I've put it in wrong here. See how I have this little gap here? It's meant to be up here. All we do is just hit the side of one of the flats and it will turn. Slowly make our way around. You don't want to flog the piss out of this stuff. It does go nice and easy. So just get that nice in the center. So you see now I have my broken bit of my spacer lined up with the hole now. So let's put our other race in. Now I just like to put a little bit of oil on our surface where the race is going to sit. It just makes it help it when we're knocking this in. Yes, you could do this in a press, but sometimes I like to do it without a press just so you can sort of feel the fit. And we just make our way around with our little punch here. So these things aren't that tight really, they're just tight enough so that they're not going to spin when their load is being pressed on them. So you hear the note change. So that is my inner bearing all fit. Like I said, it's nice to do it with a punch sometimes. You can feel how tight it is and you can make sure it's going in square. Sometimes you can put a bit of pressure on this thing in the press and it's not square and you will do damage. So if you've got a press set up to do it, sure, just do that. But sometimes it's nice to do it like this. So we can put our two bearings in with our inner spacer later. So I can just keep going ahead, put these two bearings in the outer, and then we are good to give these cases a bit of a paint. I am going to paint the inside of these. I'll show you that in a sec. little note change, that is the bearing seated. So, like I said, make sure you have your bearings opposite each other like that. So, taper, taper. So the tapers are opposite. That's how the bearing works. So that is that all sorted out. So we don't have to do anything with our pinion side except paint the inside of it. Now, I'm going to paint this with a Gliptal, which is sort of like a pause sealer. This is what I'm going to paint the inside of my cases with. It's Gliptal 1201 red enamel. Now, I'm going to go through, start painting this thing. I'm going to time lapse it, and while I'm painting it, I will talk to you about it in the time lapse. This is probably the most asked questions. Why I do this, what is it, what the hell's the deal with it? I'll tell you about it in a sec. Basically, Gliptal is just a paint that I like to paint on the inside of cases. You know, helps them seal up, all that shit. You know, aluminium is super porous, and on early cases, they're not great castings, and sometimes the oil seeps straight through the cases. So this stuff just helps seal up the cases and helps the oil return better. All right, so while my cases over here are drying, I thought I'd go through the last thing and probably the most major thing we're going to go through before we can start balancing and assembling our flywheels is our rod set. Now, I got this motor off a buddy of mine. I'm rebuilding it for him, and there was a few bearings missing out of his rod set, and it needed new wrist pin bushes, needed a whole bunch of shit done to it, needed new races. So I didn't want to really fuck around and do all that. In the States, I know it's much easier to find all these bits, like new races, new bearings, new stuff. But in Australia, it is not that easy. So all I did was I went and bought a brand new Dixie rod set. It's a nice Japanese rod set, super nice. It's not as good as rebuilding a brand new Harley set of rods, but it is the next best thing. So I thought I'd just show you, if you guys haven't just bought a brand new rod set like I do, if you're thinking of reusing the rod set you've got, or maybe just buying new bearings for it, I'll show you the best way to check it. So these rod sets, when you buy them like this, come with the nuts, come with the crank pin, and they come with the bearings and the races and everything, and they're all pre-matched, ready to go. So they're super easy. You can just pull these things apart, balance it up, put the thing together, and be done with it. So basically, if you've got an old rod set that you're thinking of reusing, basically all you want to do is you want to pull the thing apart, right? So you want to take this thing completely apart. There's our brand new crank pin there. Like I said, this thing needed a crank pin as well. So by the time I got all that shit, it was just cheaper and easier just to buy a brand new set that are already matched. So when you pull these things apart, well, easy. They're pretty fucking finicky. So you've got your knife side, which is these are caged rollers too, so that makes life even easier. These are not usually caged; these are usually just loose. Anyway, so you've got all these rollers. If you're reusing your rod set at home, you want to go through and inspect these rollers, right? You want to go through, make sure there's not any big scratches, scores. You know, there's not any hard facing missing off it, any of that stuff. The best way to do it is get yourself your micrometer, and you want to measure each roller in two places, so sort of 90 of each other, and that'll tell you if they're oval or maybe they're worn in one spot or whatever. So do all that, measure them all fucking whatever there is. I forget how many there is, 88 or no, that's not right, that's gearbox stuff. Anyway, measure as much as there is. If you guys know how many bearings there are, put it in the comments below. But you want to measure all this stuff. So basically, once you've measured all that stuff, your crank pin looks good, there's no material missing off it. Once again, get your micrometer, measure this in a few places, make sure it's not oval or worn. Inspect your races here, make sure they're the same, measure them, not oval, not worn. Usually you can see a pretty distinct race mark where your hardened rollers have been running in the race. But obviously this guy is brand new, so I don't have to worry about any of that. But if you at home are reusing your old ones, just inspect all that shit. And then the best way, once again, you can measure your life away a million times, but the best way to do this is a feel fit. So I'm going to set up the flywheel with the crank pin in it, and then we're going to load all our bearings in, and then we're going to test the fit. So this is what you should be doing on yours before you start assembling your flywheel. So let me set that up. Righto, so my buddy Ollie lent me this cool little flywheel jig here. These are super easy to make at home if you don't have one. all you need is like a bit of box section with a hole in the middle. And basically these two studs here, they go in these little holes in your flywheel here. And that is specifically for setting up your flywheel and tightening shit up, all that crap. So what we want to do, we just want to get our crank pin right, and we want to put it in our flywheel just like that. And then we want to put a nut on. We don't have to go through and tighten this nut up too much. I just want to tighten it up so that when we fit these rods, we don't feel the crank pin moving. So I'm just going to put a little bit of pressure on that. Nothing crazy. So we put that on there like that. So with no oil, we want to put this together. So easiest way to do that is put our bearings on like that. Like if you've got a standard style setup, you have to put the races in and then feed the bearings in one by one. Just be careful of that. And then we put our rod set on just like this. Just want to move it back and forth till it goes the whole way down. And then basically all we're going to feel fit for is some up and down, right? We want to move this guy. See, we want to have a little bit of knock up and down. So little you probably can't even see it. We want this to just be able to knock up and down. That's a nice fit. And then your knife is always going to knock a little bit more. When you're inspecting your bottom end in your engine, if you're just doing a top end, you can usually tell how many Ks are on this thing by how much this guy moves. So this guy is nice and firm, just like that, and this guy has next to none. So you also want to push up and down, make sure there's no up and down movement, make sure she moves nicely like that. And these rods are good to go. They fit super, super nice on this crank pin. So that is really all we need to look at with the rod set. If you want to make your life easy, test your crank pin, your piston pins in your bushes, all that stuff before you put it together. It's easier to get this stuff honed to size now than when the engine's together. So good little tip, that one. Alright guys, that is pretty well it. That is pretty well all we need to do to measure up all our bearings, order the right shit, check our rod set, all that stuff before we get to the next step. So step 2 in rebuilding a shovel head is going to be balancing up the bottom end. So I'm going to completely go through, I'm going to do a sheet balancing this bottom end with you. I'm going to go through the whole thing, show you how I do it, how to weigh stuff, what to worry about, what not to worry about, all that crap. And then on the episode after that, we'll balance these flywheels and then start chucking this thing together. So that is pretty well it. Like I said, a lot of people ask how they can support the channel. I am currently out of shirts, so the best way you can support the channel is like, comment, subscribe. All that helps my video get more traction, more people view it, and that really helps me out. So the other thing, I reply to all comments, so if you guys got a question, comment, anything like that, I reply to them all, so please chuck it down below. I will reply to you. So like I said, thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you on the balancing video.